Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy fun content and cool videos, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let's jump right in.
"25. That is the number of people who have gone missing at the park since the beginning of the year, or nothing being done or said about it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'll lose my job when they find this posting. But I have other things to be scared of at this point, and this needs to get out. I'm a wilderness ranger at Mount Rainier. My job is to walk the hundreds of miles of trail and wilderness in the park. It's looking for problems and helping lost and injured hikers. In the old days, any lost hiker would mean all of us going out together, putting together a search plan, and doing our best to get them home safely. Things are different today. It's ever since the start of 2022. Whenever a person gets reported as missing, the family is assured we are on it and will do our best to find them, and promise that they will dispatch us to look. As soon as the family is gone, our bosses tell us that they'll have a search and rescue company take over. And if we know what's best for our jobs, we should just focus on checking trail conditions and doing the rest of our jobs. And so it's gone on since. 2022. At first, there were just a few people missing here, and they're all over the park. It didn't seem that unusual, other than our rangers not being involved in the search. But we figured it was some new policy and shrugged it off. More people started disappearing as the year went on, making all of us wonder what was going on, and why it had been made clear to us we should keep our mouths shut. Personally, I figured it was just a combination of bad trail conditions from a rough winter, an influx of inexperienced hikers, and the Park Service trying to avoid looking bad when we needed more funding. Until last Thursday, it was an overcast day, and I was walking along the trail up to Ipsot Pass in the Carbon River area, humming quietly to myself to pass the time and wondering how far up I would go before I had to put on crampons when I saw it. Off to the side of the trail, maybe 50 feet into the forest, there was an odd light on the forest floor at first. I thought the light was just a reflection off of water or some trash someone had left, but as I moved closer, the light didn't fade or change. It just stayed steady. Maybe it was a lost flashlight. I had walked this trail dozens of times and never noticed it before. I knelt down, taking my pack off, and saw that the light seemed to be coming from just under the dirt. For some reason, I felt uneasy. I looked around to see if anyone else was nearby on the trail and saw no one. Shrugging, I reached into the dirt to poke at the light and see what it was. Poking around, I found the corner of a slightly open trapdoor that was at most only a foot wide on each side. It was camouflaged nearly perfectly. If it had not been left just barely ajar with the light exposed, there is no way anyone would have seen it from the trail. I kept opening it, feeling uneasy but hoping it was some sort of buried seismometer, or at worst, maybe some hiker's idea of a good place to cache food and water for a long trek. Instead, I found the opening to what appeared to be a small burrow of sorts with an electric camping torch at the corner. I shoved my head down to look inside. The space was small, with enough room for one person if they didn't mind contorting themselves. On the walls of the burrow were dozens of Polaroid photos of people hiking. All of the photos seemed to have been taken very low to the ground. The photos were from all over the park, many dozens or more miles apart. Most of the photos I didn't recognize, but among them I saw a few that I knew for a fact were hikers that had gone missing over the last year. Then my heart stopped. I saw a photo of me hiking along the Ipsot Pass trail around a half hour ago. Crack, I heard a twig snap somewhere around me. I took my head out of the burrow and started running down the trail the way I came. I didn't look back or stop until I got to the wilderness cabin near Ipsot Campground. I locked and barricaded the door and waited until another ranger showed up the next morning, not sleeping a wink. I asked him to walk back along the Ipsot Pass trail with me. He was annoyed that I wouldn't say why, but agreed. We spent an hour looking, but couldn't find any sign of the burrow. I asked for some time off right afterwards, and my manager seemed very suspicious and demanded to know why. I made up some excuse about my family and didn't tell him or anyone else what I saw. For some reason, I knew that telling them would at best end with me losing my job. I don't know who or what made that burrow, but I think it's taking people at Rainier. And for some reason, the government is covering it up. I wish that was the end of the story. But it's not. This afternoon, I saw something glinting from within the air vent on the floor of my kitchen. I thought maybe my cat had stuck another toy in it. I took the grating off the vent to take the toy out. Instead of a cat toy, I found a Polaroid photo, taken low to the ground, of me making breakfast this morning. When I first got the job, I couldn't believe my luck. I was a very solitary person. I loved to read and be alone. When I saw an ad for a park ranger manning a fire tower, I just about jumped out of my skin. Working overnight at a Walmart wasn't exactly the best job in the world. There are some stories I could tell about that as well. But I applied for the job and was ecstatic that I got it. They made me do a week of training before my first shift. Most of it was dry reading and making sure I was qualified in CPR. They showed me the job's ins and outs, and then I followed in my car as we drove to the tower in the middle of the day. It was awe-inspiring to stare up at the underside of the tower, looming above me, suspended high in the air by the metal pylons. Once, I started climbing the narrow metal stairs with hints of rust at the edges. I was somewhat less than excited. In fact, I was terrified. I don't like heights very much. It's not like I go all vertigo or anything. It's just I prefer to stay on the ground. Once we reached the top and pushed open the trapdoor to get onto the deck that surrounded the tower, I was doing a little better. I opened the door that led into the tower's interior. Looking around the room made me forget all about the terrible climb. It was like a small apartment. There was a small refrigerator, sink, counter, cupboards, and a small table. In the center of the room was a table with a map permanently attached to it. Of course, there were windows all around. There was a 360-degree view, as you would expect for a fire tower in the middle of a state park. The view was absolutely amazing. I could see the peaks and valleys for miles in every direction. It was a photographer's dream. The other ranger explained what was expected of me. We worked 24-hour shifts, so there would be times I would have to sleep. But I had to set an alarm and get up to scan for problems at least once per hour during the night. During daytime hours, I had to scan every 30 minutes. There was a radio to report any trouble, and a phone in case I needed to call the fire department in my mind. I was already drooling at the thought of getting paid to take amazing pictures and sit around reading books. The ranger told me that it was extremely important that I read the rule book first thing. He asked if I had any questions, and I said no. He reinforced that I could not leave the tower no matter what until I was relieved. I followed him down the narrow staircase to get my supplies from my car. He got in his truck and hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else. But then he shut the door, wished me well, and drove away. It took me 3 trips to get all my stuff up to the top. At home, it's nothing to bring a few boxes of groceries into the house. Here, it became life and death. I was near the top with the box in front of me when I stumbled on one of the narrow steps and nearly fell over the side. I paused for a long moment to regain my balance before continuing to the top. It suddenly struck me that this job might not be the cakewalk I thought it was. I pushed that thought to the back of my mind and went for my next 2 loads. Basic supplies, books, phone chargers, camera occupied the second and last trips. Once I was up for good, I collapsed into the chair. I was on my way to Naplin when I heard static on the radio. I jumped up and grabbed it. "Hello?" I said, but no one answered. I figured this was the ranger's subtle way of reminding me it was time to do a check. But lugging 3 loads up the tiny stairs of death had put a serious crimp in my fire watch time. In fact, it had been nearly an hour since the other ranger had left. I did my slow pan around the room, checking each part of the forest for smoke and seeing none. Having successfully completed my first go-around, I celebrated with a bottle of water while I put the groceries away. The cupboards weren't empty, but they weren't a gourmet's delight either. Nearly a full shelf of baked beans didn't exactly thrill me. But I had the supplies that should do me for a few shifts. I sat the bread on the counter and loaded the cold cuts in the fridge. I would get some more options the next time I went shopping, by the time I finished putting things away. It was time for another check. The sun was starting to set, so I grabbed my camera and took some amazing pictures. I couldn't wait to upload them to my computer at home. As I looked around the room, my eyes landed on the manual. I realized I hadn't read it yet. I sighed and took it over to the chair. I was sure it would have me out cold in no time. As I opened the book, a piece of notebook paper fell out. I picked it up and read. The real rules: never, under any circumstances, leave the fire tower until you are relieved. Turn off all lights between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. If you receive a radio, transmission, or phone call between those hours, do not answer. If anyone knocks on the trap door during those hours, tell them they'll have to wait until morning. Do not open the door. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. If animals surround the tower, don't go down to look. Fire your flare gun into the air twice, 1 minute apart, then lock yourself in the bathroom and hope for the best. I sat the note down and stared at it. Was this a joke? Were they having some fun with the new guy? I wasn't looking forward to getting hazed at 2 o'clock in the morning. I put the note back in the book and skimmed through the manual. It was a real snooze fest of standard rules and nonsense. For the next check, I decided to use binoculars. I was rewarded by seeing a bear and 3 deer. I pulled out my camera and took some pics, but the zoom wasn't quite as much as I needed to get some really good shots. You could still tell it was a bear, but it was a little blurry. I decided to go camera shopping with my first paycheck. What's the use of having this spectacular view if I can't take good pictures of it? Soon after sunset came the twilight. The sky lit up a brilliant orange. I took some more pictures and did my scan. I was just about to go back inside when I noticed a thin wisp of smoke in the distance. I grabbed my binoculars and tried to get a better view, but there were too many trees in the way. I pulled out my compass and got a general direction, then grabbed the radio and called the ranger on duty. I told him I had a fire, and gave him the direction and general distance. He acknowledged and said he would check it out. I stayed glued to my binoculars, waiting to see the smoke lessen. Minutes seemed to each take an eternity as the smoke continued to rise. Nearly a half hour later, the radio came to life. "Hey, rookie," the ranger said. "Did you find it? Did you put it out?" "I still see smoke." "Did I tell you the wrong place?" I said into the radio all in one breath. "Whoa there," he said. "Everything's fine." It was just a campfire. "A what?" "A campfire," he said. "Nothing to worry about." "Campfire," I repeated in a daze. "Yeah. You'll want to see more smoke, and it should be a lot thicker and darker before you call it in." I stood in silence. My face beat red with embarrassment. "Cheer up," the ranger said into the silence. "At least you didn't call the fire department." I looked over at the phone, knowing I was mere minutes from doing that very thing. "Yeah, thanks," I said. "Sorry about that." "Don't worry, kid," he said. "At least you erred on the side of caution instead of letting the forest burn down." I put my face in my palm and shook my head. So much for a good first impression. Twilight had faded, leaving a few last vestiges of light as the clouds transformed from dirty gray to black. I began to realize just how alone I was. Out here, when the canopy of the night fully fell, doing my checks from inside was nearly impossible. I had lights on, and every window I looked out of became a mirror of me, looking back in at myself, alone in a wooden box, suspended 100 feet above the ground. Made it that much creepier? I stepped out onto the deck in the cool evening air. The total darkness was oppressive. I couldn't see anything. How was I supposed to see smoke? I did a slow walk around the deck, looking out blindly at the trees. As my eyes adjusted, I was able to make out some shapes of the mountains and even the soft glow in the distance of the nearest town. That was small comfort to know that things still existed out in the world, and I hadn't been plunged into this cover of darkness. I finished my check and stepped back inside. After being out in the darkness, it was way too bright. I turned off the main overhead light and the light over the entrance. The room settled into a comfortable glow with enough light to see, but not blind. In fact, it was a little too cozy. I felt a nap coming on. I laid down on the surprisingly comfortable cot and closed my eyes. I woke sometime later to static sounding on the radio. I reached for the radio to answer it, but something in the back of my mind told me not to. I looked at my watch and it said 2:12 a.m. I froze. Looking around the lit room, I thought about the strange rules I had read earlier. I reached up and turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. As my eyes adjusted and I could see a few things, I looked out the window and could swear. I saw someone peering in at me. Just then I heard static on the radio. There was a voice trying to get through, but it seemed too weak. I waited to see if they would call again. A minute later, static sounded again. Beneath it, I heard the voice. It was a little stronger this time. I could just make it out. Help me. It said in a feeble yet insistent voice. I reached for the radio, but something made me glance at my watch first. It was 2:23 a.m. I faltered and didn't answer. Those creepy rules, I thought. What if they're real? I've already broken one by having the lights on. What happens when you break the rules? I sat in silence wanting to know the answer, but at the same time not wanting to know. The radio call came through much more clearly this time. Help me. Can't anyone hear me? I need help. The voice sounded desperate. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It had a strange quality that I couldn't quite place. I fought the urge to answer, not knowing if I would be fired for dereliction of duty or not. This is what I was out here for. I needed to answer, but my mind just wouldn't let go of those rules. The minutes ticked by like hours. 3 more times the radio sounded out its plea, each time sounding more desperate. I watched the time, counting the seconds until 3. When the time finally came, I picked up the radio. Whoever was calling for help. Please state your position so I can relay help to you, I said. Who is this? Came the answer on the radio. This is a park ranger manning a fire tower. A park ranger. I've been on this channel all night, and yours is the first voice I've heard. That's not possible, I thought. I had several calls for help over the last hour, I said. Are you sure? Absolutely. I wrote down the time of each call. Then why didn't you answer them until now? I paused. What could I say? Because a weird list of rules told me not to? Ranger, I had. I said hesitantly. Extenuating circumstances. The voice repeated as though tasting them. And what circumstances would those be? Whoever this was, they weren't going to let it go. I'm not at liberty to say. You mean like falling asleep and breaking the rules? The voice said, sounding deeper, raspier, and more menacing. I froze. I hadn't turned the lights on yet, leaving the room in eerie darkness that left me feeling very exposed. I slowly panned around, looking out the windows and remembering the earlier feeling of being watched. You can look all you want, but you won't see me, the voice said. It's after 3. I said, hoping the terror I felt wasn't evident in my voice. You have no power over me, the voice chuckled. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Normally you would be correct. However, you broke the rules. What if I didn't know about the rules? I said, grasping at straws. Nice try, but you knew that you should be safe after 3. Damn it. I thought it picked up on that. So what do you want? I said, fearing the answer. We're hungry, the voice said. Only now it sounded like many voices speaking at once. Come down and let us feed. My legs turned to rubber as I stumbled over to the door and stepped out onto the deck. The moon was rising half full, casting light into the darkness. I looked down and saw over a dozen large animals surrounding the tower in a circle, and each one of them was looking up at me. I dove back inside and locked the door. I frantically searched for the flashlight. Once I found it, I picked up the phone to call the ranger station. There was no dial tone. I hung up and tried again, but still nothing. I pulled out my cell phone, but there was no signal. I paused to clear my head. Okay, I thought. You're freaked out right now, but what's actually happened? A weirdo on the radio, some animals around the tower. This list is making you paranoid. Just then I looked outside and there was light off in the distance that looked like an airplane. The problem was, it was heading straight toward me. It was mesmerizing. I found myself staring into the rapidly approaching glow until I realized it was going to ram into the tower. I found the best cover I could on the opposite side of the room and surrounded myself with as much furniture as possible. Being that the furnishings were sparse, that meant I dragged the chair over in front of me. I covered my eyes and hoped for the best. I may or may not have mumbled one of those, I promise. I'll be good if you get me. Out of this prayers, the seconds tumbled into minutes. Nothing happened. I peeked over the edge of the counter and the light was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief and wondered why I hadn't heard any engine sound. I decided it was because I was too busy ducking for cover. Then it hit me. I grabbed the manual and pulled out the list of rules. There it was, rule number 5. If you see a glowing object floating toward the tower, don't look at it. Cover your eyes and count to 50. When you open your eyes, it should be gone. If not, cover and count to 50 again. I read over the rules again and realized how many had come to pass. For a long moment, I thought that maybe it was an elaborate joke. Some of the rangers yanking the rookie's chain, but there was too much I couldn't explain. The radio transmissions, the glowing light, the animals surrounding the tower. Then I realized I had broken that rule too. I hadn't fired the flare gun as instructed. I dug through the cupboard where the emergency supplies were kept and found the gun. I grabbed 2 flares and stepped out onto the deck. As I questioned the intelligence of firing flares that could end up causing a forest fire when I was supposed to be trying to prevent them, I heard a strange sound. I held my breath and cocked my ear for a better listen. It wasn't just one sound, it was many. I glanced over the side of the rail toward the ground and saw the animals all growling and pawing at the ground. Working themselves in a frenzy, I backed away and loaded the first flare, then pointed up and fired. It rose majestically, glowing blood red until gravity slowed its ascent and pulled it back to Earth. I watched closely to make sure not only that it went out, but where it landed, just in case. I waited a minute and fired the second flare. Watching where it landed as well, I stepped back inside and hid in the bathroom as instructed. I knew in my heart that I was safe from the animals as long as I didn't go down the steps. The radio sounded off, scaring me nearly half to death. "Fire tower number 5, the voice said. "Have seen your flares? I'm on my way. Are you physically injured?" "No, not at the moment," I said. "I'll explain when you get here." "Roger that." En route, I tried to calm my nerves by thinking about what job I would apply for next and how unfortunate it was that this one didn't work out. I thought about what I was going to tell the ranger when he got here. I couldn't tell him the truth. But what else could I say? There were some animals at the bottom of the tower that scared me. I honestly considered calling him back and telling him not to come when I felt heavy footsteps on the bottom stairs of the fire tower. I must have been daydreaming and let time slip by. I stepped out of the bathroom and went to the trapdoor. "Are you here already?" I said into the radio as I reached down to unlatch the trapdoor. That was fast. "What are you talking about?" Came the clear answer over the radio. "I'm not there yet." I paused as I felt the footsteps come closer to the top. "Where are you?" I said quietly. "I can barely see the tower. I'm probably a mile away." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. I looked down at the bolt I was about to unlatch and pulled my hand back very slowly. "Which direction are you coming from?" I said, "Southeast." "Yes." I looked in that direction, and sure enough, I could see headlights approaching. The radio sounded again, but with a slightly different voice. The tower ignored that last transmission. It said, "I'm already here. Let me in, please." I stared down at the trapdoor as though it wanted to bite me. Tower. "Let me in," it said more insistently. I backed away as something began beating on the trapdoor with tremendous force. The boards shook with every impact. I stepped inside and locked the door, then barricaded it with my only loose piece of furniture. The chair. Tower 5. Tower 5. I don't know who that is talking to you, but it isn't me. Do not open that door. Repeat, do not open that door. I backed into the bathroom with the flare gun in hand and locked the door. The pounding on the trapdoor became louder. I knew it wouldn't take much more of a beating. The whole room shook with every impact. I closed my eyes and prayed in earnest this time, And then my salvation came in the form of the engine sound of a pickup truck. I knew the real ranger was here. I listened as it came closer, and then stopped. There was an awful silence for a moment, and then gunfire. Over and over, multiple shots in rapid succession. Then there was a lull, followed by more shots. The pounding on the trapdoor had stopped as soon as the truck pulled up. "The coast is clear, Ranger. You can open the door now," came a voice over the radio. I put my hand on the knob, smiling to go out and greet my savior and win. I heard a weak transmission. "Don't. Not me," it rasped. A heartbeat later, the screaming began. It was a gut-wrenching scream of terrible suffering. I could hear it beneath me. All I could do was drop to the floor and curl up in a ball as the screaming went on and on. I closed my eyes and tried not to imagine that poor ranger being ripped too. Shreds by God knows what. Soon the screams lessened. In volume and intensity, as though they were moving away. I rocked, back and forth, hugging my knees until unconsciousness mercifully took me. I woke to strange voices. Calling my name, I opened my eyes, and I was surrounded by people in blue uniforms. Panicked and backed away from them as fast as I could until my back hit a wall. "Calm down," one of them said. "It's all right." I looked around the room like an animal that had been backed into a corner. I was ready to fight my way out. "Are you injured?" He said. My mind raced to remember where I was. I looked out the window, and it was morning. The sun was shining, and I could see blue clouds. Everything from last night came back to me in a rush. I looked around the room and saw nothing out of the ordinary. "I'm not injured," I said to the EMT. "Can you tell us what happened here?" A ranger said from behind them. I looked over at the manual that contained the list of rules, and for a heartbeat considered telling him to read them. "No," was all I said instead. "Can I go home now?" The ranger glared at me. Wanting answers and not getting them is frustrating, I know. "Is he all right to drive?" The ranger asked the EMT. They gave me the once-over, BP lungs, heart rate, and didn't find anything to be concerned about. "I'd say physically he's fine," the EMT said. The ranger sighed. "Go ahead," he said, "but I'll want to talk to you tomorrow." I nodded and stood, gathered my things, and started toward the door. When I got to the open trapdoor, I hesitated, seeing it had been hacked open with an axe. I took a tentative first step, then another. Surviving a night as I had only to fall down several flights of stairs would be quite ironic as I made my way down. White-knuckling the railing the whole way down, I saw people busy at the bottom. They were picking up shell casings with gloves and putting them into plastic bags. I could see spots of blood here and there, but no bodies, either human or animal. I saw the trail of blood as it disappeared into the woods. I stood on the bottom step for a long time, wondering if I was allowed to step onto the ground. I took the step and bolted for my car. I started it up and drove out of there as fast as I could. Just as I turned onto the gravel road, a deer walked out in front of me. I slammed on the brakes and slid to a stop, mere inches from hitting it. It didn't move, just stood there staring at me. As I looked more closely, I could see blood on its nose and mouth. My heart skipped a beat when I saw a shred of a ranger's patch impaled on one of its antlers. Its eyes bored into mine as I slammed into reverse. Then drive swerved around the deer, broke every speed limit getting home. I called my boss and quit as soon as I got there. Then I packed and started looking for a job in the city. Maybe I can find a nice quiet warehouse to guard, but if it has a set of strange rules, I'm walking out, no questions asked. The rocky dirt road crunched beneath the truck's tires as I drove through the dense forest. Careful of the branches which overhung the path and scraped the windows. My eyes were darting around constantly, keeping an eye out for wildlife and fallen trees. This far into Yosemite, there weren't many people. But as a park ranger, it's my job to patrol these woods and protect visitors from nature as much as possible. Not to mention protecting nature from them, especially this time of year when unlicensed hunters are out, and clueless campers and amateur hikers are roaming alongside them. It's often a lethal combination, Just as I was thinking about amateur hikers, I saw a woman standing a little ways off the road. She was in a rock-strewn field on a slope leading up a hill to my left. Despite the fact that we were out in the middle of nowhere, she had no hiking equipment, no backpack, nothing. As I got closer, she saw me, but began to walk away, marching up the rocky slope. This far out in the middle of nowhere, I expected a wave or a hello, at the very least. Most of the time, if you're out here on foot, you don't see anyone for days at a time. "Hey, miss, are you okay?" I yelled, worrying she was suffering from exposure. Sometimes people get lost out in these woods, and by the time you reach them, they're nearly catatonic. I'd seen it before, men and women with a 1,000-yard stare. She didn't respond. Instead, continuing up the slope until she reached the top. Then she disappeared into the tree line. The woman's face looked familiar, I realized, and pulled up a file on my laptop. It showed people who had been reported missing in the area. It took a minute, but eventually I found the woman's file. There were photos that matched the person I had just seen exactly. Except her clothes were different, and the woman had been reported missing 8 months prior. She should look considerably worse, I thought, especially considering her lack of supplies. These woods were harsh, brutal wilderness. Even experienced hikers and hunters had become lost in the area and had died from the elements. I quickly called in to the station and told them what I'd seen, then grabbed my backpack and took off on foot. Running up the rocky slope towards the trees, if she continued at the pace she'd been moving, I had a good chance of catching up with her. At the top of the hill, I managed to find her tracks. I followed them into the woods, tracing a path through the trees. For almost an hour, I followed her path through the forest. Becoming more and more convinced that I should have caught up with her, I realized something was wrong. And I had lost the trail. It was like the woman had vanished. I kept moving forward, thinking maybe I would pick up her tracks again. This happened sometimes. I knew as an amateur hunter. The quarry's path would disappear occasionally, only to reappear a little ways away. So I kept going, pushing aside branches and shrubbery, and moving ever deeper into the overgrown wilderness. And that was when I saw it. "What the hell is that?" I muttered to myself, not believing my own eyes as the object came into focus up ahead. It was a staircase that appeared out of the overgrowth. Looking otherworldly in this environment. What is this doing out here? I realized I was talking to myself but couldn't help it. I also couldn't seem to help the fact that I was steadily moving towards the staircase in the forest. Despite a growing feeling which told me I should stay away, the closer I got to the stairs, the more I felt as if someone was watching me. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and goosebumps rose on my arms as I approached. Moving closer and closer until I was standing right in front of it. Strangely enough, the stairs looked relatively new. They appeared unassuming and normal in every way, except for their odd location. The wood was not weather-worn or moss-coated. It was clean, and I would guess it had been built in the last 10 or 20 years. But the staircase ended after exactly 13 steps. It was a staircase leading to nowhere. It was an eerie sight out here. Since I was well aware of how difficult it would be to construct them in the middle of nowhere, what was the purpose of them? Who would build them, and why? Even as I was asking myself these questions, I found myself walking up the stairs. It was like I was in a dream, as my feet seemed to move involuntarily upwards. But the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck grew worse and worse with each step, and I could feel the weight of someone else's movements on the stairs with me. I was sure of it. Eventually, the paranoia became so overpowering that I had to turn around, feeling as if someone or something was definitely right behind me on the stairs. But when I turned around, there was no one there. Suddenly, I felt terrified as hell, and started wondering what. I'd been thinking climbing those stairs in the woods that shouldn't have been there. I started going back down, still feeling eyes watching me from all around. The trees nearby rustled with movement, and I saw a vague shape moving behind them. Hurrying the remainder of the way down the steps, I called out to the figure, thinking it was the woman I had seen earlier. "Miss, if that you? I've been looking all over for you. Are you all right?" I asked the dark figure in the shadows, but it didn't move or respond. Instead, it just continued to watch me. "Okay, lady, I can't help you if you don't." Suddenly it occurred to me that the figure in the shadows was too tall to be the woman I'd seen earlier. It looked to be a person at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe more. And they were ducking behind a tree so as not to be seen clearly. The thing stood up. Even taller, and I realized it had been crouched down. It was enormous, its form impossible to examine in the low light. But it was definitely watching me, and there were more of them, I realized. My heart pounding faster and harder until it felt like it was going to beat right out of my chest. I spun around, looking at the forest all around me, seeing shadow shapes everywhere. For a few long moments I was frozen, unable to move or breathe or think, and then I saw a long-fingered hand pushing back the foliage, preparing to emerge. That woke me up from my trance. Whatever these things were, I could tell they were not benevolent or good. They were creatures of darkness, luring people to them so they could feast on their minds. I tore my gaze away from it and began to run. Racing through the trees, I could sense them following after me. A platoon of lanky, impossibly tall creatures with long fingers. Were they the ones who had created the staircase out here? Were they aliens? Sasquatches. I had no idea, but every time I looked back over my shoulder, I saw them gaining on me, vague shapes. Moving so quickly they blurred and were tough to make out. That was when I realized it was getting dark outside. But that didn't make sense, since when I'd set out, it had been the early morning hours, around 8 a.m. Checking my watch, I saw it was no longer functioning. Nor were my cell phone or GPS devices working. With no other choice but to keep running, that's what I did. Bolting through the forest until eventually, I found the rocky slope beside the dirt road where I'd left my truck. I ran right over the edge of the cliff, so terrified and frantic that I didn't see it coming. The things were just behind me by that point, and I was almost ready to resign myself to dying trying to fight them. Instead, I went tumbling down the rock-strewn hillside, somersaulting and hitting my elbows, knees, shoulders, and skull off the boulders and stones. A mini avalanche ensued, and I went down hard, face-planting as my feet were unable to keep up with my momentum. Sharp pain struck me in the forehead, and I tasted blood in my mouth as my vision went dark. I laid in a pile of rubble and went to sleep. When I woke up, there was a park ranger standing over me, asking if I was okay. The weird thing was, I didn't recognize him. "You look familiar," he said, furrowing his brow. "What's your name?" I told him, and his jaw dropped, his face turning a shade paler. "Can't be. Everybody thought you were dead." Looking around, I saw my truck was nowhere to be seen. It was a different season as well. The trees were turning slightly yellow when I went into the forest, an early signal of autumn. But now they were bright green, as they would be at the beginning of summer. "What's the date today?" I asked him. He told me, but I didn't believe him at first. "You're making that up," I said, shaking my head. "I just went into the woods for a couple hours to find the woman. That's when I remembered her again." "Did anyone find her? Or is she still missing?" "Nobody's seen any woman. Just like nobody has seen you for 8 months. His eyes were suspicious, and I realized he thought I was losing my mind, or had lost it out in the forest. I shook my head and looked back into the woods. "We gotta get a search party out there. Didn't you hear me? If you saw a woman when you went out there, she's long gone by now." My eyes stayed fixed firmly on the trees in the distance. Not for her. There's something else out there. I couldn't resist the pull of it and started wandering back up the rocky slope. It felt like I was an iron filing, and that staircase was a strong magnet drawing me towards it. "We all need to go to it." The other ranger grabbed my arm and pulled me back, restraining me, yelling at me to calm down. It took 5 more men to get me to stop, and to get me into the hospital. They keep telling me what I saw wasn't real. That I was suffering from exposure? That I got lost in the forest and hit my head, suffering a concussion. The doctors say I hallucinated all of it, but I know what I saw, and as soon as I get out of this hospital, I'm going back. It was always my dream to be a park ranger. I loved the outdoors. The birds and bees weren't just a metaphor for me. They were my life's passion. So when I graduated college with a degree in wildlife management It felt like I'd finally arrived, but then I couldn't get a job. I sent application after application, hoping against hope I'd stand out among the hundreds of candidates vying for a single position. It goes without saying that as a new grad, and my resume wasn't the most impressive of the bunch. That changed when I got a personalized letter typed on a typewriter and sent through the mail. It was an invitation to a job at a small state park I'd never heard of. My former college advisor and I had already planned to get coffee that afternoon, so I excitedly brought the letter to show her. Her smile went flat and her eyes dark when she saw the letterhead, and after scanning the text briefly, she handed it back with a terse expression. "Tell them no." I blinked rapidly in shock, completely surprised at her reaction. "But why?" "You know, I've been job searching for months, and this is the first time I've gotten anything. It doesn't seem odd to receive an offer for a job you never applied for?" I frowned. I didn't have a good answer. "You were one of my best students, and you deserve a job that—" She trailed off, then shook her head slightly. Before continuing, as though trying to clear her mind of a disquieting memory. Her stare was intense when she began speaking again. "It's not a good offer. People I know say bad things have happened there. You have to trust me." I promised I'd look into it more before deciding. When I got home, I checked Google and Yelp reviews. There weren't many, which didn't surprise me given I'd never heard of the park before. But they were all filled with enthusiastic praise. The trails were perfect. The weather was perfect. Everything was perfect. Then I reverse sorted to the most negative reviews stretching over several years. My sister and her husband disappeared while hiking, and no one cared. My husband's car broke down right outside the gates. He called and told me he was going to walk to the ranger station to get help, and never came back. Why isn't anyone talking about this? This is going to sound crazy, but I swear some of the signs were changed. We only found our way back because our daughter was pretending to be Hansel and Gretel and throwing Cheerios on the trail. I decided to sleep on it, but if I'm honest, I already knew what I'd decided. My bank account was running on fumes. I was jobless and loans were due, and I was tired of eating ramen. Most times, people who became lost or injured in a park had it happen because they weren't paying attention, either to the weather or the trails or their own bodies. Next day, I called the number on the letter, and a man who sounded old enough to be my father answered. He seemed enthusiastic, if not a little surprised, when I told him I was interested in the position. And I did a short interview that felt more like a formality. By the end of the call, he asked when I could start. I said I could throw everything in my car and be there by Tuesday. "That's perfect," he said, and hung up. The drive across country was both scenic and uneventful. After months of demoralizing job applications, I felt excited again. I was going to work. In my dream field, the only shadow to my good mood was my former advisor. After emailing to say I accepted the job, she wrote back almost immediately, "Please don't do this. Something else will come up. I'll talk to the chair about letting you TA for me. Just don't go." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't reply. The directions I was given brought me to what would be my new home. I had my own small cabin inside the park. It's just one room, really, with a bed, a kitchenette, a couch, and a TV that would be right at home on Antiques Roadshow. That didn't matter. I preferred to read anyway, and it was going to take some time to get up to speed on my new park. By the door was a whistle on a thick cord with a sign that said to only blow in case of emergencies. I stared at it a few moments. The presence of bears, then a knock at the door, brought me out of my daze. Outside were two men and a woman, all old enough to my parents, or maybe even grandparents, with warm smiles on their faces and several tote bags full of supplies to help me get started. They were effusive in their welcomes, which is how I learned. They were all older than my grandparents, but each looked to be in perfect health. As they helped me set up, they spoke easily about the magic of the park and how it was time to get a new generation trained. I enthusiastically agreed that nature was magical and thanked them again for hiring me. That first night, we sat around. A special welcome campfire to officially introduce me to the park. As I added my name to an old book of previous rangers' full names only and no nicknames, they emphasized, I felt as though I was exactly where I wanted to be. They spent the next few weeks orienting me to my new position. I shadowed them during days and evenings and spent any free time I had reading about the area. Still, my advisor's final words lingered. Nothing seemed weird or wrong or out of the ordinary. Why the warning to stay away? I loved working there. There were no accidents, no crimes, and no missing persons, despite what the negative reviews said. The trails seemed to maintain themselves. We had a steady flow of visitors. Even bad weather days were good. I never got sick. Honestly, I'd never looked and felt healthier. Then one late autumn night, at a team meeting over a campfire, I was told we'd spend the next few days taking down, hiding, redirecting, or otherwise changing the signs. They would be wrong for 3 days, then we'd make them right again. Oh, this must be for some kind of maintenance, right? I asked. Guileless. My 3 fellow rangers looked at me without smiles, their faces the most serious I'd ever seen. I know. But there are people inside, I replied, confused. How will they find their way out? Silence was my answer. I looked to each of them, expecting someone to smile, to tell me it was a prank, to give me some kind of explanation. I don't get it. The park demands a sacrifice. One of the rangers, a woman named Sherry, intoned. I laughed. You can't be serious. At their continued stillness, my laugh subsided into a nervous smile, my eyes darting from face to face, waiting desperately for one of them to reveal it was a joke on the new ranger. Be ready at 7 a.m., Casey said, before they all got up to leave. I shouted after them. You can't do this. There are people in there. I don't know what I expected. Maybe guilt or shame. Maybe one of them realizing they had taken the joke too far. Instead, Sherry just answered without looking back. That's the idea. Stared into the fire for a long time before finally putting it out. Human sacrifice. The parks were magical, but not that kind of magic. Denial is a crazy thing. I think I still thought they were joking, at least until the next day. Keep your whistle on you, Chip said as I followed him on the trail. As you're changing the signs, you might see something out the corner of your eye. Don't look at it. By now, the park knows you. But if you get turned around and truly can't find your way back, blow your whistle. My stomach was twisted into knots as we spent the next few days turning signs the wrong way, hiding them in brush, or taking them down altogether. I can't explain why I just went along with it. Maybe I was in kind of a daze. Maybe I still didn't believe it. Every so often we'd see hikers or campers. I opened my mouth to speak one time, and Sherry glared at me so fiercely I temporarily forgot to breathe. Then, with the sweetest voice, she sent them in the wrong direction. Afterwards, they had one last team meeting where I was instructed to stay in my cabin for the next. 3 days, and to open the door to no one, I drank myself into a stupor with the absinthe a friend gifted me before I left as a play on me being a green fairy in the park service. Despite working through a good portion of the bottle on an empty stomach, I didn't even wake up hungover. The fact it was so much more sinister now. There was nothing of note the first 2 days. I'd almost started to convince myself that I must have been wrong or misheard. That this was some kind of trial period job test, maybe of my ability to follow directions. Then on the 3rd night, so late it was almost morning, I heard screams getting louder as they approached my cabin. I wasn't thinking when I opened my door. I wasn't thinking when I shouted at the hiker to come inside. I wasn't thinking when I left the safety of my threshold. I wasn't thinking when I blew the whistle. His shirt was torn and bloody, bruises and scratches on his face, and chunks of hair missing. His look of relief was heart-wrenching. He ran towards me, our arms stretching towards each other, and then the forest. Ate him. I don't know any other way to describe it. The trees, the ground, the air. It's like they came together in one giant maw and simply vanished him out of existence. I didn't know what to say or think or do. I felt the forest looking at me. It was unhappy. Its warm, welcoming presence had gone ice cold. As I backed up to my cabin, I realized I'd done something very wrong. In the distance, there was a rustle, and the entity simply dispersed, probably to chase new prey. The next day, I threw everything I owned in my car and left without a word or note. And I finally texted my advisor. "Avoid the parks," she wrote back. "Which ones?" "All of them. I haven't set foot in or near a park since. My country has so many of them, more than you'd think, that I mostly fly now. The last time I got too close, It's like I could feel the air bending my way, see the trees and rocks reaching for me, but I suppose it could be worse. I'm in a support forum for these kinds of happenings now. There's one man who has to avoid any body of water larger than a sink. He hasn't taken a bath in years.